Sure. Here's a more detailed and engaging rewrite of your story. The moment my husband, Alex, and I returned from our honeymoon in Italy, I expected to settle into our home as newlyweds, enjoying the start of our married life in peace. Instead, I found myself facing an entirely different kind of challenge, one that came in the form of his parents, Michael and Deborah. Their presence in our relationship had always been noticeable, but I had hoped that after the wedding, they would finally step back and let us live our lives. I was wrong. Jet-lagged and surrounded by unpacked suitcases, I was still adjusting back to reality when Alex came home from work looking unusually tense. That alone should have been a red flag. As I set the table for dinner, he hesitated before finally speaking. "My parents are coming to stay with us for a little while," he said cautiously. I looked up from my plate, already wary. "Okay, for how long?" Alex scratched the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. Indefinitely." I put my fork down. "I'm sorry, what?" He shifted uncomfortably. "My mom wants to be around, to help us settle in." I frowned. "Help us settle in? Alex, we've been living together for a year. We don't need help." That's when he hesitated again. His eyes flickered to the side, debating whether or not to tell me the truth. I folded my arms and waited. Finally, he let out a sigh. "She wants to make sure you treat me right." I laughed out loud. Not out of amusement, but because it was so utterly ridiculous that I couldn't help myself. "You're serious?" He simply nodded. "So let me get this straight. His mother wanted to move into our home to supervise our marriage because she was worried I would mistreat her fully grown adult son? And the worst part, Alex was actually letting her." I told him, firmly, that this was a terrible idea. They were welcome to visit, but moving in was an entirely different story. He didn't argue, which gave me a false sense of security. But the very next evening, a car pulled up in front of our apartment. I glanced out the window and felt my stomach drop. There they were, Michael and Deborah, unloading suitcases. Not an overnight bag. Not a small duffel. Full-sized rolling suitcases. I turned to Alex, silently demanding that he put an end to this. Tell them no. Set boundaries. Do something. Instead, he mumbled, "We'll make it work." Oh, we were absolutely going to make it work. I stood by as Deborah strutted inside, that smug little smile on her face making it clear that she thought she had won. Michael followed, lugging their bags in as if they were moving in permanently. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I simply pulled out my phone, dialed my mother, and waited for her to pick up. "Hey, Mom," I said sweetly. "How do you feel about moving in with us for a while?" There was a pause. "What?" "Yeah," I continued. "Alex's parents are staying indefinitely. I figured you and Dad should too. Just to keep things fair." Silence. Then, in the background, my father's voice boomed, "We're packing." The moment I announced that my parents would be joining us, Deborah's expression changed so fast I thought she might get whiplash. Michael blinked. "What?" I smiled. "Well, if you guys are here to make sure I treat Alex right, my parents should be here to make sure he treats me right. Fair is fair, don't you think?" Deborah turned to Alex, eyes wide with indignation. "Tell her this is ridiculous." Alex, overwhelmed and visibly exhausted, just shrugged. "I mean, it is fair." I could have kissed him for that. The next morning, my parents arrived, and they were ready. My dad immediately made himself comfortable on the couch, flipping through channels like he owned the place, sitting there in his underwear with no shame whatsoever. My mom, ever the homemaker, headed straight to the kitchen and began inspecting the fridge. "Oh wow, Deborah," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I see you put your soy milk where my eggs should go. How do we solve this?" Deborah's jaw clenched. At breakfast, my dad sat across from Michael, loudly chewing his toast. Then, after a long, exaggerated swallow, he casually remarked, "Michael, you chew really weird." Michael blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm just saying, it's kind of annoying." By the second day, my mother had taken over organizing the closets. My father had claimed the couch as his personal throne. And, just like Deborah, my parents began hovering over Alex, asking if he was eating enough, getting enough sleep, if I was treating him well. Deborah was fuming. By the third night, she pulled me aside, her voice tight with frustration. "This is insane." I shrugged. "So is moving into your son's home because you think his wife is going to mistreat him?" She stared at me, seething. And that was the moment I knew I had won. Not that she was ready to admit defeat just yet. If anything, Deborah doubled down. By the fourth day, her passive-aggressiveness escalated. She'd let out loud, exaggerated sighs when she saw dishes in the sink. If I was in the kitchen, she'd comment just loud enough for me to hear. Oh, I always made sure to cook fresh meals for my family. A microwave dinner just doesn't feel very loving. To which my mother, without missing a beat, replied, "Oh, I know. I used to say the same thing to Alex when I was making sure he ate properly." Deborah's eye twitched. It was a battle of endurance. A war of wills. But eventually, the message became clear. On the fifth day, suitcases were packed. On the sixth, Michael and Deborah made their dramatic exit. As the door shut behind them, my parents and I exchanged victorious glances. My dad stretched out on the couch, sighing in contentment. "Ah, peace at last." Alex, rubbing his temples, muttered, "I need a drink." I smiled. "I'll pour you one." Because in the end, balance had been restored. And most importantly, boundaries had been set. The apartment had become a battlefield. Deborah's passive-aggressiveness reached new heights. If I left to run errands, she'd immediately turn to Alex, her voice dripping with concern. "Is she always out this much? You must get lonely." Michael wasn't any better. Every time my dad made himself comfortable on the couch in the home I paid for, Michael would bristle, his expression tight with irritation, as if my father was some unwelcome intruder. The whole situation was spiraling into absurdity. And the one person who felt it the most was Alex. He was exhausted, his shoulders weighed down by the invisible tug-of-war happening around him. He looked like a man being pulled in 4 different directions, and he was losing the will to fight. One night, I walked into our bedroom and found him sitting on the bed, rubbing his temples. He let out a long breath. "This is a lot." I leaned against the doorframe. "It was fine when it was just your parents, though, right?" He sighed. "I get it. You were proving a point." I crossed my arms. "And do you get why I had to prove it?" Alex looked up at me, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, finally, he nodded. "Yeah." I waited. He exhaled. "I should have told them no." Bingo. I had barely tasted victory when Deborah decided to play her most manipulative card yet. The next morning, while I was in the shower, she pulled Alex aside, her voice soft, careful, crafted with the precision of a scalpel. "Are you truly happy?" Alex frowned. "What?" "You just seem different. Quieter. Like something's wrong." She was good. I wasn't there, but I knew how she operated. Every word was carefully designed to plant doubt, to make him question everything. And then, just as she had him on edge, she delivered the final blow. "I think you rushed into this marriage." That was the moment Alex finally saw it. The manipulation, the control, the real reason she had forced her way into our home. I didn't even have to fight this battle. That night, as we lay in bed, Alex rolled onto his side and murmured, "I think my parents need to go home." I smiled. "Oh, you think?" The next morning, Alex sat his parents down. His voice was steady, resolved. "Mom, Dad, this isn't working. You need to go home." Deborah's mouth fell open, stunned into silence. Michael's face darkened, his grip tightening around his coffee cup. "Excuse me." Alex took a deep breath. "We love you both, but this isn't your home. You can visit, but living here isn't an option." Deborah turned to me, her expression sharp with accusation. "This is her doing, isn't it?" Michael slammed his cup onto the table. "We raised you. We sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay us." Alex's jaw clenched. "Dad, this isn't about being ungrateful." Michael wasn't listening. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back, and stormed out. Deborah followed, but not before throwing one last dagger over her shoulder. "You'll regret this." And then, just like that, they were gone. For the first time in weeks, the apartment was silent. Peaceful. I turned to Alex. "So, when should I tell my parents to leave?" He groaned. "Can we just have one peaceful day first?" Fair enough. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. At this point, my parents were just vibing. My dad had fully claimed the couch as his personal throne, and my mom had settled into her new role as head chef of our kitchen. They weren't in any rush to leave. But then, 2 days later, Alex's phone buzzed with a message. "Mom, we need to talk. Meet us at the cafe on 5th. He sighed, already exhausted. "I should probably go." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? This feels like a trap." It was absolutely a trap. An hour later, Alex returned looking pale, shaken. I put my book down. "What happened?" He dropped into a chair, running a hand down his face. "They're selling their house." I blinked. "What?" "They already listed it. They're downsizing." His voice grew tense, his hands tightening into fists. "And they're planning to move into a condo in our building." I laughed, because surely he was joking. He wasn't. I grabbed his phone, scrolling through the texts myself. "Mom, we need to be close to you. Families should stick together. Mom, I'm already looking at a lovely 2-bedroom on your floor. Mom, we'll finally be neighbors. Won't that be wonderful?" No, it would not be wonderful. I didn't hesitate. I dialed my mom. "Me, you and Dad need to extend your stay." "Mom, why? What's going on?" "Me, Michael and Deborah are trying to move into our building." Silence. Then, in the background, my dad's voice thundered, "Hell no." There was no way in hell I was letting my in-laws live next door. So we worked fast. My mom immediately started inquiring about every available condo in the building. She had no intention of actually buying one, but she made sure it looked like there was an overwhelming amount of interest. Meanwhile, my dad made sure every interaction with the building manager was loud, chaotic, and deeply concerning. He wandered the halls shirtless, chewing on an unlit cigar. He doesn't even smoke, grumbling about all the weirdos moving in. I found out which realtor Deborah was working with and flooded them with fake inquiries from fake buyers. Suddenly, the condos were in high demand. Prices shot up. Availability dropped. Within 3 days, Deborah called Alex. Her voice was tight with frustration. "We've decided to look elsewhere." I almost cheered. Alex hung up, then turned to me, shaking his head in disbelief. "I can't believe you orchestrated that." I shrugged, smug. Family should stick together, right? For the first time in weeks, Alex laughed. A real, genuine laugh. And that night, for the first time in months, we finally slept soundly in our own home, alone. For a few blissful weeks, everything was quiet. It felt like we had finally won. Then, one morning, Alex's phone rang. He glanced at the screen before answering on speakerphone. "Alex," Michael's voice came through, grave and desperate. "I lost my job." A pause. "We're out of money." Another pause. "We need a place to stay." Alex and I locked eyes. My stomach twisted, and I knew in that instant, this nightmare was far from over. Michael and Deborah had spent weeks manipulating, scheming, trying to force their way into our lives. And now, they had the perfect excuse. Financial ruin. Alex began pacing, rubbing his temples. His voice was strained, uncertain. "I mean, if they really lost everything." I cut him off. "Are you seriously considering this?" He hesitated. "They're my parents," he muttered. I folded my arms. "And they're not our responsibility. They have nowhere else to go." His voice was tight, guilt creeping in, just as they had planned. From the kitchen, my parents had been listening. My dad snorted, shaking his head. "Oh, come on. They didn't lose everything." Alex frowned. "What do you mean?" Without a word, my dad pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it toward us. There it was. Michael's very recent golf club membership, an expensive one, paid in full just 2 weeks ago. Another screenshot. Deborah's extravagant shopping spree, thousands of dollars spent at luxury boutiques. And then, the final blow, a real estate listing. Their house hadn't actually sold yet. My mom scoffed. "They're lying." Alex's face went pale. "They didn't lose their money," she continued. "They're just trying to guilt-trip their way into your home. Because they want control." We didn't waste another second. Alex called Michael and Deborah, asking them to come over. They arrived smug, carrying themselves like they had already won, like they knew Alex would cave. They sat down with the ease of people who believed they belonged there. Deborah sighed, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "We know this is hard for you, honey, but it's just temporary." Alex sat stiffly, his hands clenched into fists. I had never seen him this angry before. He took a slow breath, his voice eerily calm when he finally spoke. You lied. Michael frowned. What? Alex lifted my dad's phone, his expression unreadable. You didn't lose everything. You just wanted to force your way into our home. Deborah let out a nervous laugh. That's not true. Alex didn't even look at her. Instead, he started scrolling. Then explain this. One by one, he laid out every purchase, every expense, every blatant lie. Michael's face turned red with fury. You've been spying on us. I couldn't take it anymore. Are you kidding me? I snapped. You came here, lied, tried to manipulate your own son, and now you have the nerve to act offended. Deborah's voice wavered. Alex, you know I only wanted to protect you. His head snapped up, eyes blazing. Protect me from what? Silence. Michael stiffened, grabbing Deborah's hand. We don't have to take this. Alex stood too, his voice final. No. You don't. You can leave. Deborah's eyes welled with tears. Honey, we're family. His face was like stone. No. You don't treat me like family. You treat me like property. Like something you own. And I'm done. Michael let out a harsh scoff. You'll regret this. Alex met his gaze without flinching. No, Dad. I won't. And then, for the second time, they walked out. The apartment was truly silent. Alex sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I sat beside him, resting my hand on his back. You okay? I asked softly. He didn't answer for a long time. Then, finally, he exhaled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. I should have done that years ago. The next morning, my parents started packing. They had never planned to stay forever. They had only been waiting for Alex to wake up. Before they left, my dad clapped him on the shoulder. You did good, kid. My mom hugged him tightly, whispering, you deserve better. And for the first time in his life, I think Alex finally believed that. Michael and Deborah went low contact after that. At first, they sent guilt-tripping texts, laced with passive-aggressive regret, but when Alex stopped responding, they gave up. I wish I could say they apologized. That they took responsibility. That they finally saw the damage they had caused. They didn't. But Alex. He was free. And that was the best revenge of all.